Hello everybody and welcome back to another one of those videos where I read the Future of the Fortress posts and sit here and sweat in my chair because it's extremely hot here in Canada right now and my air conditioning isn't running for the recording process. If you want to help me pay for air conditioning, you can find out how to do that at the end of this video. Anyway, let's dive in. Day 12 Games Report is what we're going to start with here for August 1st, 2022. Starting off with a portion read by Three-Toe. And Zach says, all kinds of progress. All kinds. The art is coming along well. The animal people have produced a lot of excitement. The interface is practically complete and now scales to the screen, preventing eye strain. The game also survived a complete playthrough without any crashes or game-killing bugs. But the thing that will most please you, our most dedicated fans, is that the ASCII mode is now confirmed. Toadie managed to flip the switch and convert all of the progress we've made in Premium back to the code page 437 in a matter of days. This is because the new graphics still fit on the grid the original Dwarf Fortress engine is based on. That didn't mean it was easy. Those of you who have worked soul-crushing jobs may understand my brother's intense will to live, and it's all for you. Congratulations to the generous. To finish up the report, we have some words from Tarn, and Toadie1 says, thanks to everyone that helped out. That continued bump is from the new patron numbers, so it looks like things will now be up until release. I'll continue integrating art while it comes in, and over the code side, it looks like the main work that'll occupy me for the first part of the month are all things keyboard. Gotta get the key bindings menu up and update the designation cursor, and make the macros still work. Then probably more tutorials and updating the compiler and bugs. The last thing to do with the report before we dive into the Future of the Fortress posts is the numbers. So as you can see, that was where the dip in May, where they put out a call for help, essentially, for finances to keep the two brothers funded and their two households. And then they got a massive assist in June, which was largely like the new patron support, or the new patron support hadn't come in yet, but that was largely PayPal donations. And then the continuation of that bump that you see in July is from the new patrons, which has helped their income tremendously, upped it by a third. So it's real nice to see the Zach and Tarn not complaining about things like car payments and increased rent up until release, which will be kind of lovely for them, and I'm very happy about that. But with all that aside, we can now dive into the Future of the Fortress posts, and the first question comes in from Doorkeeper. And they say, hillocks have shallow underground farms. Will the changes to soil farming affect the crop yields in hillocks? More generally, does the simulation now track whether a site has shallow sub-farms or deep farms, and does crop production for that site correspond accordingly? Upon further inspection, the tiles inside the individual hillock structures are actually made of cavern floors, so it looks like they're just deep farming. Technically, not shallow farming as implied by location. Though, you've mentioned in your most recent response that hill dwarves have gathered the improved soil from the mountain home, and that's my headcanon for now at least. How would that work anyway, if you were to add a soil gathering zone? Since soil is a material and is the same regardless of depth, plus cavern floors are currently just rock overlaid with mud, would the rock and mud gathered from the cavern have a special flag for plot improvement use? I haven't noticed this before until now, but I've dug out an indoor surface soil layer in fort mode, and the resulting floor tiles are just labeled as cavern floor. Wondering if this was also changed as part of the farming overhaul. Cavern floor just indicates that the tile attribute is subterranean. As far as I can tell, it's not displayed if vegetation is growing on it. But still wondering if the changes you've made affect this label, since players could read cavern floor and confuse shallow soil for the cavern surface. I'm not sure anymore if this means the hillock farm plots are counted as cavern and deep farming, since I initially assumed they were because the tiles were labeled as cavern floors. And then Clinodev responds with another new farming question. How does potash-fertilized muddied soil and stone and plot compare with cavern plots? How about with potash-fertilized cavern plots? Some cleverness with numbers could make potash fertilization useful for more than specialist early quarry bush cultivation. And Tarn's response is, are you talking about World Gen production? Everything there works differently from Fort mode, and we haven't updated anything. There's no production in other parts of the world after play begins. And yeah, if we went into this further and added a zone, we'd need to clarify further what deep soil actually means, since it doesn't exist currently except as the grass floor of the underground plants, and as the mud if it happens to be in the right spot. The effect is linked to the natural open cavern layers, so it's not indicated in the floor name, but the layers are also kind of hard to miss, at least at first. Currently, surface is just divided by 4, and you can fertilize cavern plots. So surface farming is 1/4 as effective as farming in caverns. Got it. The next question comes in from Blood Warrior, and it's a set of 3, but they're pretty quick, so I'm going to do them in one batch. And they say, when will the development page of Dwarf Fortress be updated? How quickly is progress going on Premium? Any time frame for it? And once Magic and Myths update comes out, in what ways can, during gameplay, a deity manifest? Tarn's responses to all 3 real quick. It hasn't felt like a thing since we were in stasis, more or less, until we return to the villain's release. 2. Things are going well. Still trying for autumn between the tutorials, art and keyboard stuff, music, and Bugsies. We have our hands full, but it doesn't feel like there are any vague unknown chunks left anymore. Haha, who knows in regards to Magic? We want the possibility of them being more active and tangible, but that could attach anything from them having a standard body to them being a weather event or a plane or something. We'll need to hit certain possibilities on the first pass since there's so much to do. I'd anticipate bodied ones at least. The next question comes in from Immortal D, and they say, regarding the changes to farming, yet another farming question, and I suppose any subterranean effects in general, will there be any changes to the way light-dark tiles are calculated? Right now, once a tile is exposed to the surface, it becomes permanently light, even when covered again, meaning you can neutralize cave adaptation without risk. And Tarn's response is, I haven't changed this, and I'm not really sure how to do it reliably and quickly. It feels like it would need to investigate the entire area around for suitable materials somehow, to avoid towers or even cottages from becoming subterranean, rather than just inside. Just looking at the old subterranean area is inefficient since the player might strip mine for a bit before building their outdoor structures, so it actually needs to understand what's going on somehow. The next question comes in from Water Lemon, and they say, will the Steam version have the option to display water at depth as 1 to 7? Not necessarily numbers, but at least a different image. And Tarn's response is, we have this in 2 ways currently, the transparency of depth, and now there's also a button you can press next to the minimap that turns the actual numbers on and off. There's also one to put arrows on the ramps. The next question comes in from everybody's favorite Useless McMiner, and they say, oh, I've noticed many bandit forts being continually declared war on by random civilizations. Why is this? Is this to cull bandit populations? Because as far as I can tell, it doesn't have a major effect on fort populations and instead results in a clutter with the 1,991th pillaging of a random bandit fort being noted. Yeah, I've seen this before many times in World Gen. Tarn's response is, no, this isn't intentional. It'll be cleaned up at some point, and we're going to sort out some of the fort issues when we have transitioned to the adventure mode side of the villain's release, since forts were going to be important for parts of that. But then we had to delay the whole thing to work on the Steam edition. So this next one, I'm going to do some tricky back and forth stuff to kind of read the questions in order because it's pretty long. And it comes from I don't know how to say that. Anyway, their first question says, you often mention the famous map rewrite that will happen soonish. And although with the name as foreboding as that, it must be very important to the game. What exactly is there to rewrite? And what will the map rewrite do and change regarding the map and world generation? What will it mean for modders? So that's question 1. Before I jump to Tarn's response, I'm going to read this very long tangent from Partek Landil, which basically answers the question, which is, the map rewrite has been discussed a fair bit over the years. Well before the villains tangent that turned into the current premium tangent within a tangent. The purpose of the map rewrite is to allow a number of improvements as well as to allow for new features that currently aren't reasonable to implement. This list is not exhaustive but may provide an indication of what it includes. Support for the loading of different Z levels separately. This means adventure mode wouldn't have to load all of the layers of rock below, and would also mean that excursions from the fortress as trade and war parties enter into other dimensions or across portals into the same dimension, etc., would be feasible without slowing things down to a crawl. It's more or less necessary to support player activities in multiple areas concurrently. And support for multiple maps, such as normal world and another dimension. Support for portals connecting non-adjacent parts of the map to each other, both in the same map and to different maps. And this can also support maps that wrap around, moving over the edge to the west that causes you to enter the east edge of the map, resulting in a cylindrical world, or even wrap around the north to south as well as to the east to west, resulting in the shape that doesn't exist in the real world. It will not support spherical worlds because of the mess caused by trying to turn a sphere into a grid with equally spaced and sized tiles. World maps create enormous distortions and close to the poles, which doesn't matter to the real world people as nobody lives there. Support for moving terrain, such as boats and lifts and floating and flying islands, etc. Support for sphere influence on the terrain, flora, and fauna, which probably also supports magic influence over some things. And other support for future expansion, and the light and heavy aquifer implementation is a little odd because the data structures have run out of bits to store more properties in the note. Of that a lot of things the rewrite will support won't actually be implemented until much later. In the arcs, portals, when they are implemented, will start with one-way portals where stuff will just appear on the other side with no access or view to the other side, for instance. The map rewrite is the first part of the big wait, which the second part being the initial implementation of myths and magic, which will make some of the things permitted by the map rewrite. When asked whether the big wait could split up a map rewrite and myths and magic phase a number of years ago, Toady didn't see any point in it. The premium tangent may change the circumstances, but if it does, it probably won't impact anything until it's actually been experienced. The premium version decision has already led to the decision to have parallel support and bug fixing and mirrored content development of the released version with the development of the new version. And the longer the long wait progresses, the more of the new current version content will have to be thrown away and replaced with corresponding content in the next version, resulting in it being implemented twice. At some point, it might be considered less work to switch the map rewritten baseline. However, that's purely my speculation. And to Tarn's response for question 1 of this big mess of things, he says, I think the replies cover this pretty comprehensively and accurately. There is a lot of capabilities we want but don't have, and the editor's side of the myth and magic stuff also means that there's a lot of map sites that will be available for modders in new ways as well. And now to part 2 of, I'm just going to say FIC for their name. Regarding culture, symbols and colors don't have the same meaning depending on the culture. For example, the color black in Europe is attached to death and grievances, whereas in China it usually is associated with prosperity and good health. Are there any plans to add cultural differences in Dwarf Fortress? And Tarn's response is, on top of stuff mentioned in the replies, or I might have missed them, there is also randomized positions in human and goblin societies. And the humans have randomized values. But yeah, there is a lot to be done here that just doesn't exist in the game, so it can't be differentiated either. The plan is to address some of this in the entity and scenario, etc. update after the magic stuff. Which is a very long ways off, I should add. And part 3 from Fix Questions, and they ask, regarding technology, every civilization seems to access the same level of technology no matter what age it is or how far in time the game takes in place. This means that even at the dawn of dwarfkind, they already have figured out how to make wacky contraptions, but 10,000 years later, the goblins still haven't put 1 and 2 together and figured out how to make drawbridges. Do you have any plans regarding technology evolving with time? And Tarn's final response to this question is, this is similar to the cultural differences, with the somewhat irritating addition that we have all that scholarly stuff that just doesn't intersect with the actual game mechanics, except a few specific pretty unimportant ways. Like the types of books which are available to write. Ultimately, the hope is to have those completely tied together. Not that all texts need to be invented by scholars in a library, and of course, Prometheus-type critters could also teach and gift people stuff, but this, of course, would have a profound impact on the game and need to be approached in some prudent way, since the only initial effect could be to take mechanics away from people. This is why I hate tech trees in games, is because if Dwarf Fortress were to suddenly get a tech tree, it would just mean the game would slow down, and nobody wants that. The next one comes in from Delfosono Noso, and they also have a multi-parter, but this one's a little bit easier to get through, so I will just read through them. And they say, according to Dwarf Fortress Talk 7 and comments you made in this thread, artifacts are truly indestructible. If atom smashed, etc., they'll be hidden and scrambled during the claim and reclaim or adventurer visits. I've been wondering about a few nuances to this. Are books and named items treated the exact same way as artifacts? I reckon that the game tends to treat them the same way as with the L artifact screen. 2. Any changes to how hidden is handled or how artifacts are scrambled after destruction. I've made 2 attempts at destroying books and finding them again, and both times I've failed. I haven't been able to find a proper artifact that was destroyed either, ignoring copies of books which can be destroyed. A completely unrelated question, when 2 sites occupy the same world title in the C screen, will only show one of the sites and the other is inaccessible to raids and missions unless you send a mission for a person or artifact, and that might be there. Has this been dealt with in the new and upcoming UI stuff? Thank you to you and the community for any answers to this. And Tarn's response to all 3 questions are pretty quick. Part 1. There's a flag on them disguising crafted artifacts from other named objects. This flag came up later, so it isn't applied everywhere, but it does allow for me to draw distinctions. 2. It doesn't look like it. It's still using the same placement function for hidden objects and artifacts that it expects in the area, which doesn't have assigned locations. However, if the item blasting function is called on an artifact and it adds a destruction event, and on top of the hidden flag, utterly destroyed or transformed flag, which should prevent it from coming back. And it looks like it doesn't care if it's crafted or otherwise. Artifacts being indestructible by default appears to be gone. The destroyed flag is also added if the artifact is used in a job to make something for books or scrolls in a world map library that is destroyed post-world generation, or books and scrolls in any building that is destroyed in world generation. And 3, he says, nope, it should be easy to handle with a new pop-up, and there's never time to do everything. And I can aim for doing it by the time the army stuff makes it much more important to get right. This next one was supposed to be included as part of my large chats with Zach and Tarn, but it was too long to ask on the video, so thus it got submitted here as part of Future of the Fortress. So let's read Sebastian's question. They say, I have a few questions related to world generation, which turned out longer than I anticipated. Apologies in advance for being so wordy. As I understand, the prevailing winds are based on real-life polar and Ferrel and Headley circulation cells. But are they generated to match the poles of the real world? Could there be a world generation option to set prevailing winds to be homogeneous across the whole map? Something like an existing option to set the North Pole and South Pole be or neither, but have options for the wind to come mostly from the north and northeast and so on. What scale do you think do the temperature settings use in the advanced world gen options? I've heard that the bug with the poleless worlds having extremely hot and temperate biomes is already a known issue, and I know that the actual temperature is affected by rainfall and elevation, but I'm curious what the scale is supposed to be, since it doesn't seem to match the degrees Eurist used elsewhere in-game. Also related to temperature, any rough idea of when we might get more fine-grained distinctions between temperate and tropical? Maybe even have yearly minimum and maximum temperature values for each region, and have each plant and animal have its own tolerance. At the very least, it would be nice to have subtropical biomes, so that we don't have koalas in subarctic climates. I love that in this game, you can generate a world with a very realistic distance, area, and scale if you have no poles set in a very narrow temperature range. However, there are a few problems that arise when trying to make it realistic as possible, so as to avoid questions about geometry and scale and the whole planet and size of even a large DF world, and for the fun of recreating real-life locations, which is why I asked about the wind directions and temperature issues, and my last question is about vertical scaling. While it's possible to realistically recreate real places at a 1-to-1 scale horizontally, a large Dwarf Fortress world is nearly large number meters across, and it could fit Tasmania. If you have you have to flatten the real elevation range to fit it into Dwarf Fortress's 400 by 2.8 Z levels, 2.8 meters Z levels, or find an area with any salt water that is less than 278 meters deep, and the highest elevation above sea level is 840 meters, and you have to deal with the awkwardness of having the mountain, air quotes, biome everywhere that's more than 560 meters above sea level, even if there's no big difference in biome IRL. For the reference, Mount Everest is about 9,000 meters, and the same level as the Challenger Deep is about 11,000 meters below it, or about 3,200 and 4,000 Z levels, respectively. So basically what I'm asking here is, how doable would it be to have deeper oceans and taller mountains? Having a world volume to simulate it would be a performance issue, but could the map have the same number of Z levels everywhere and have them offset depending on the elevation of the region or something? Isn't that how it already works? And Tarn's response is, we don't do anything interesting with winds, but yeah, the directions alternate over the latitudes and they depend on the pole settings. And yeah, no A-pole world is treated like a North and South Pole world. The wind direction could be made more complicated or have additional options, sure, and it just hasn't been the priority since nothing really depends on it much right now. The base world temperature is just an arbitrary scale. The conversion is local temp equals world temp plus math, and I have a little record of how this came about. I probably started with a 0 to 100 fractal and then adjusted it based on elevation, etc., and then mapped it over the Fahrenheit plus 9968 or whatever scale, whenever that came up, with the 0.75 factor added to make it line up better with what I wanted for the biomes. There are some comments in the conversation function about targets, and I had for freezing and scorching places anyway. Adding additional biomes is complicated since they are used in a lot of places in various ways, and we were going to mess about with them, leaning towards weird magical ones with the map stuff, and we'll see if it shakes things up. But I have to be careful about how regional animal populations are created, and it can be slow and expensive to prepare matches with proliferation of biomes. It's hard to add more verticality because when there are steep slopes or places where we would have had cliffs before, it has to be loaded in memory currently. Part of the map rewrite is going to get rid of this requirement, and this means that there'd be areas where no sky is loaded and only underground with no way to get up to the sky, and loaded areas where there are effectively bottomless pits. Both of these present problems that need to overcome. A steep mountain slope or a cliffside might have both at once. Next, we have a short one, thank God, from Kontaco, and they say, any function for right-clicking implemented? And Tarn's response is, right now right-clicking closes stuff. There are lots of menus opening and closing, and it's nice to not have to click X's or reach for the escape. The only place that I've felt tension with this is where I'd sometimes want to right-click to erase, say during designations, but the erase mode works well enough for that. The next question comes in from Bread and Roses, and they say, I'm very excited about the Steam release for many reasons, but one will be the mods. There seem to always be quality of life mods which come out, and I was wondering what the policy would be for if these mods get adopted into the game. I realized Dwarf Fortress is probably a deeply cherished personal project, but I also know that the devs have things that they'd rather work on. Has this been given any thought or an answer? Thanks. And Tarn's response is, we listen to modders, and when they have questions, etc. And we have set up some memory addresses for DFHack, etc. And the modders try fixes for design problems before we have a chance to get to them. I'm not sure how much things will change. It's not a matter of explicit policy as it is just time and etc. Though occasionally there are issues like spreadsheets versus no spreadsheets, where we have a different point of view than the community surrounding the mod. We'll certainly continue adding little improvements however they come about. Another question from Kontaco, and they say, previously, when you had shown the hyperlinks, figures and entities were colored according to their kind. Does this coloring carry over to statue and engraving descriptions in Fortress mode? Do functional hyperlinks. Whether or not Legends mode is going to be hooked up in Fortress mode is an open question. There are the concerns about spoiling vampires and such, which we should probably be a little careful about. But there's nothing really wrong with rewording the investigation either, though it does feel a little easy to just be able to open up your fort's history and see the vampire migrant right there with their identity and giving their name away. The technical side isn't hard now. The text construction and render code just needs to receive an extra flag to enable everything. And the input would also need to be enabled similarly. So mostly just a question of time, with a pretty comprehensive payoff in this case. Now this next one looks like a big long question, and it is, but Tarn answers them all in one answer, so I'm going to read it as follows. Just finished reading the spoilerific Zach post over on the main page, and I think I got the gist of it. Just the nitpicky one thing I want to pick up on, though. The question directed at Toady, or Three-Toe for this instance: if the caravan limit triggers have been altered, will suddenly losing the contents before they leave the map still cause significant relationship rift, or has that tolerance and mechanics behind the trade relations been changed? Because forcibly, small creatures running around to adverse conditions and simple wildlife encounters getting too close seems like the perfect storm for noob entanglement that's going to cause players issues. When the home civs attacks and ceases further relations for no apparent reason, then the loss of the traded capital with the fort fronting the blame many times too hard to diagnose and taking the scripting and then any in-game mechanics to fix. Typically, a fortress is starting to trust relations close to zero-ish, and then in the first caravan usually is vital to direct diplomacy with any nation they interact with in 47.05 and many preceding versions. 2. Is the first contact more formal in the planned new release, or can you still send delegations of unwanted dwarves applying and demanding tribute missions to contact traders across the continent? In the mentioned already used strategy would probably be more effective in the new build because of the new better UI for trade and caravan management in general. As a cojoint question, in the same topic as trade, does this option back up the path to the merchant notability, notably returning to the game in a more force than just the off-map merchant companies? Probably just me overthinking it, but I'm amused by the idea of a spy master like Noble who writes up scribble money schemes, pays off legitimate hired goons, and handles greater money loan lending. If Spymaster ever gets completed to compare to that imagined to the role 2. That's a strange way to write that. I'll be honest though, some parts of it left me confused and sometimes a tiny bit worried over the change of such a vital part of Fortress sustainability, as my questions probably infer. But I'm still hopeful the changes are a safe addition to pass over some gripes and cheesy trade tactics. Tarn's response to all three is: it's still the same, more or less, for the next release. We aren't able to add a lot of diplomacy features. The ones I think of are the Goblin artifact diplomacy and the Elves being a little different in savage areas, aside from the wagons and endgame stuff. And the capabilities of the player aren't really different, so it doesn't feel particularly worse. The next question comes in from Brahms, and they say, hello, I have a difficulty settings question. Is there currently a way to tweak how common visits that petition for a mercenary, temple, and tavern type are? I ask because I really enjoyed having a squad of humans, goblins, and outsiders in the prior version, and since when merc companies were added to World Gen, I haven't seen a single mercenary petition. That is something that would be really cool to have as an option for having, again, someday for role-playing, etc. And thank you for reading. And Tarn's response is, if I recollect, the change of a solitary mercenary joining a company also depends on how much of a loner they are. And that might also be skewed too much, as this could be another thing you tweak. Though, it'll impact few other parts of the game, but shouldn't matter for humans, etc. too much. But I haven't added an option to alter more general world generation properties. The next question comes in from DickButtDeGrut, and they say, when might we expect some random properties to be assigned to divine materials? Any chance that we could see a small update for divine metals prior to the Far Off Myths and Magic update? Perhaps not entirely dissimilar to the prototype for magical powers that Intelligent Undead were given. The divine metals are pretty boring, as they only feature procedural generation, which assigns them a name based on their corresponding deity's sphere, and their material properties have always been the same. Without turning this into a suggestion, I think the simple things like random numbers for the material properties and maybe one or two wacky things from a list would go a long way in generating some good stories for these obscure metals. It's certainly difficult for me to say that I would not thoroughly enjoy laying a warhammer of whatchamacalliticulum that has a persistent temperature of something like 672 Fahrenheit out in an open field with nothing to guard it. And just having the dwarves sit back and watch the results of kobolds and a giant Kia bird's attempt to sneak off with it. And Tarn's response is, divine items make more of an appearance in fort mode in the next release. I haven't changed anything about their properties yet, they just act as treasures and equipment, with properties between steel and adamantine. If I remember, certainly there is now a bit more dev potential in that direction with them around the more commonly in play, but I'm not sure what'll happen with so much on the table. Myths and Magic Update is obviously the place for them to shine. The next question comes in from Blue Man Hawk, and they say, how much do you worry about accidentally sacrificing gameplay value when pursuing other goals? And Tarn's response is, you might need to be more specific. There are a lot of things that need to be balanced. Mostly we'd been sacrificing usability through the years, and now we've switched gears to bring some of that back. But we haven't had to make many mechanical changes for that reason. The next question comes in from Rekov, and they say, with the Steam release's redesign of activity zones, will there be support for activity zones that exist across multiple Z levels? This would be especially useful for outdoor pastures on hillsides where there isn't enough room for a single Z level to support many animals. And Tarn's response is, it's not coming for general zones for Steam. It's a bit too complicated to pull the Z variable out of the zones to make the zones, I don't actually know how to pronounce that word and I'm too lazy to look it up, hierarchical? I don't know. Locations, like Fantastic Dwarf mentioned, like hospitals, etc., can have subordinate zones, which makes it come for free. There'll still be some solution along these lines, but it'll also need to be respected in the interface, which might look different for the various zones. I don't know immediately that 3D rectangular solids dragged out should be treated for the same, for instance, between pastures and other zone types, but the main obstacle is just the lack of the Z range in the zone object and how much code uses a single Z height for them. Generally, for all buildings, it comes up more than 1,400 times, it looks like. The next question comes in from Maven, and they say, I apologize if this isn't an appropriate question for the future of the Fortress thread, but I've heard conflicting theories over the years, and I haven't been able to figure it out with varied embark attempts. Though I have seen reanimating biomes quickly fill up the caverns with many reanimated troglodytes and crundle pieces moving about and getting stuck on top of giant mushrooms. Does discovering the caverns have a negative effect on FPS due to cavern critter and pathfinding and flowing water, etc.? Or do these calculations just happen normally regardless of whether or not the caverns have been revealed? So Toady quotes this response from Crabman, so I'm going to read it first, and they say, I'm pretty sure the calculations happen anyway. One of the things the eventual map rewrite is supposed to do is to not be doing those calculations before they are revealed. And Tarn's response to this question is, yeah, Mr. Crabman is right. The calculations are generally happening, open or not. I couldn't think of anything that would be open the cavern specific plus very slow, but after the latest interview, this came up in a conversation, and if I remember, another element was possibly the creatures trying to pass through the pet forbidden doors when you open the caverns. These doors don't exist anymore since they caused FPS problems universally. Really, they've removed pet danger doors? Oh my word. And also, the other issue that I run into with caverns is when they all go out to gather webs, if you have a whole bunch of looms, that can cause frame rate issues. But yeah, it's mostly just cats. And with that, we've ended up at the end of this Future of the Fortress read-along. I just wanted to say a real quick thank you if you've made it to the end. I'm sitting here sweating in my chair, shirtless, and wishing I was dead because it's the middle of the goddamn summer and it's too bloody hot. I just want to say thank you very much to everybody who watches these. If you want to take part in these conversations yourself, the link to the thread is down in the description of this video, as well as to the Bay 12 posts. thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you want to help me pay for my air conditioning, you can do that via super thanks in the comments section of this video, super chat if you're watching the premiere, or via my Patreon, patreon.com/BLINDIRL. And if you want to watch me play Dwarf Fortress Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, twitch.tv/BLINDIRL. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Oh, also, if you want to watch that interview that Tarn mentioned in the last question, links in the description.